This is Miami Beach, the postcard beaches, the Art Deco hotels, the celebrity islands where billionaires dock their super yachts. Most people assume it's natural Florida coastline, shaped by millennia of waves and tides. It's not. Almost all of it was dredged out of a shallow bay about a century ago. Engineers pumped sand from the ocean floor, piled it into shapes that looked like land, and sold it as paradise. The whole thing was an engineering stunt dressed up as real estate. But here's the problem with building a city on land you manufactured yourself. That city is now spending $60 billion to keep from sinking back into the water it came from. And in the middle of the bay, there's a ghost island that shows exactly what happens when these plans fail. The 1920s were a strange time in Miami. Developers weren't just selling waterfront property, they were selling lots in the middle of Biscayne Bay before the islands even existed. The pitch was simple: buy now and we'll dredge up your land later. Sign the contract today and by next year you'll have an address in paradise. Carl Fisher, John Collins, and a cast of Gatsby-era speculators turned this audacious idea into an empire. They created the 6 Venetian islands out of nothing but bay mud, pumping sand through massive pipes until solid ground emerged where there had only been water. They transformed mangrove swamps into what we now call Miami Beach. Star Island, Palm Island, Hibiscus Island, the places where celebrities park their yachts today, were all manufactured from scratch, sold to buyers who trusted that engineering could reshape geography itself. And they had bigger plans. An entire chain of artificial islands was supposed to stretch up the bay, a Venice of the tropics for America's newly wealthy class. One project in particular captured the dream: Isola di Lolando, a luxury island paradise that would anchor the northern end of this grand vision. They drove in the concrete pilings, spacing them out in a perfect grid to mark future streets and lots. They sold the pre-construction units to eager buyers. Deposits poured in for homes on an island that was still just a forest of posts sticking out of the water. A blueprint made physical, but not yet finished. Then the 1926 hurricane hit. It killed over 400 people. It destroyed the illusion of Florida as an endless boom market, and the land bubble collapsed overnight. Isola di Lolando was abandoned mid-construction, frozen in time with its skeleton exposed to the elements. Those pilings are still there, nearly 100 years later, rising from Biscayne Bay like the ribs of some drowned beast. If you've ever driven the Julia Tuttle Causeway, you've passed right by them without knowing what you were seeing. Most Miami commuters have no idea they're looking at a failed 1920s mega project, the concrete bones of someone's paradise that never materialized. The grid is now white with decades of bird droppings, colonized by pelicans and cormorants who've claimed it as prime nesting territory. Dolphins and manatees swim through what would have been luxury streets. Stingrays glide over what developers once marketed as premium waterfront real estate with water views in every direction. Nature reclaimed the project, turning a monument to human ambition into an accidental wildlife sanctuary. But here's what makes these ruins relevant right now. A marine biologist recently proposed transforming them into something called a mangrove maze. A living seawall, an eco-tourist attraction that would actually function as climate infrastructure. The idea is to plant mangroves among the old pilings, letting their root systems grow into a natural buffer against storm surge. It would give Miami a new kind of landmark, not a failure preserved, but a failure repurposed. The past and future of Miami's land extension schemes would literally occupy the same spot in the bay. It's a poetic solution if anyone ever funds it. But poetic solutions don't stop the water that's already coming through the streets. Before Miami Beach installed its emergency pumps, parts of the city experienced something called sunny day flooding. Not from storms, just from unusually high tides that overwhelmed the drainage system. Salt water would bubble up through storm drains, spread across the asphalt in shimmering sheets, and residents would watch fish literally swimming through intersections on cloudless afternoons. This wasn't a fluke. It was happening regularly, and it forced Miami Beach into a $400 million emergency program under Mayor Philip Levine. The city raised roads by several feet, buried massive pumps underground, and rebuilt seawalls across the island. Stormwater fees jumped 84% to help fund the work. The mayor called it a 30 or 40-year solution, which was an oddly honest way of saying this is not a permanent fix. We're buying time. But even buying time came with unintended consequences. Raising the roads created a new problem for older homes. Their floors now sit below street level. Instead of water draining away from these houses, it drains toward them. The infrastructure meant to protect the neighborhood turned some homes into collection bowls for exactly the water it was supposed to remove. Small-scale fixes had reached their limit. Miami needed something much bigger. The Army Corps of Engineers came up with a solution. A 6-mile concrete seawall, sections of it rising up to 20 feet high, slicing across Biscayne Bay in front of the downtown skyline. The price tag ranged from $4.6 to $6 billion, with the federal government potentially covering 65%. On paper, it would protect a narrow strip of downtown from storm surge during major hurricanes. In reality, it would block the iconic water views that make Miami's real estate worth protecting in the first place. The wall designed to save the skyline would hide it from the bay. Waterfront condos would become wallfront condos. But the deeper problem isn't aesthetic. It's geological. Miami sits on porous limestone, and limestone is basically a sponge made of rock. Water doesn't just come over a seawall, it seeps under and through it, emerging on the other side like nothing happened. You can build the tallest wall imaginable, and the ocean will simply find another path. You can't wall out an ocean that's rising up through your foundation. This forced planners to pivot toward hybrid strategies. Shorter walls combined with restored mangroves, rebuilt dune systems, and experimental projects like Reef Line. A 7-mile underwater sculpture park designed to grow coral and buffer wave energy. The sculptures attract marine life, the coral grows over them, and eventually the reef absorbs wave force before it reaches shore. The idea is that living systems might succeed where concrete alone would fail. But living systems take decades to mature. Mangroves need time to grow dense root networks. Coral grows slowly under the best conditions, and conditions aren't getting better. Miami might not have the decades these solutions require. Here's where the numbers get staggering. Miami-Dade County alone needs an estimated $3.2 billion in seawalls by 2040, just for minimal protection. Septic to sewer conversions, necessary because septic systems fail when groundwater rises, could cost another $3 to $4 billion countywide. Now zoom out. Florida as a whole needs nearly $76 billion in seawalls by 2040. That's twice as much as the next most exposed state. And that's just seawalls, not stormwater systems, not wastewater treatment, not roads, not housing retrofits, not utility relocation. The full adaptation bill could easily push past $100 billion. The question nobody has answered: who pays? Local property taxes? State budgets already stretched thin? Federal grants that require years of applications and approvals? Or should fossil fuel companies whose products drove the sea level rise in the first place pick up the tab? Richard Wiles from the Center for Climate Integrity put it bluntly: our collective failure to come to grips with the massive costs of climate adaptation is the latest and most delusional form of climate denial. About $1.7 billion has already been funded or completed in Miami-Dade. That sounds impressive until you realize it's roughly 3% of what's needed. Here's the twist most coverage misses. The neighborhoods on Miami's slightly higher inland ground, places like Little Haiti and Little Havana, were historically lower income precisely because they lacked waterfront appeal. Nobody wanted to live away from the water. That was the whole point of Miami. The premium was always for proximity to the bay, to the beach, to the views that made postcards. Now those inland neighborhoods are becoming the most valuable land in the region. Developers are buying up properties while longtime residents get priced out, a phenomenon researchers have started calling climate gentrification. Wealth is moving to higher ground, and it's displacing the communities who were there first, often immigrant communities who built their lives in these neighborhoods over generations. Meanwhile, the billions being spent on coastal defenses are primarily protecting high-value waterfront real estate. The condos, the hotels, the commercial districts that generate tax revenue. Miami's $300 billion metro economy is concentrated on the most vulnerable strip of land. Heat alone already costs the city an estimated $10 billion per year in lost productivity, and those losses could double by 2050. The infrastructure protecting the wealthy coast may actually accelerate displacement of the people who could afford to live on safer ground. Public money flows towards saving the investments of the rich, while working-class neighborhoods face both rising seas and rising rents. The $60 billion plan isn't just about saving Miami, it's about deciding which Miami gets saved and who gets to live there. Scientists at the University of Miami ran the projections, and the numbers are difficult to ignore. By 2060, just 35 years from now, sea level in the region could rise by about 2 feet. At that point, nearly 60% of Miami-Dade County's land area would be chronically flooded at high tide, assuming no major defenses are in place. Not during storms, not during hurricanes, just regular high tides twice a day, every day. The uncertainty isn't whether it will happen, it's how fast. Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets are melting, but the rate keeps surprising researchers. Every few years, the projections get revised upward. If the melt accelerates beyond current models, the timeline shrinks. What looked like a 2060 problem could become a 2045 problem. Climate scientist Kathleen Seeley put it bluntly, everybody needs an exit plan from Miami. Swiss Re, one of the world's largest reinsurance companies, estimated that protecting Miami against all major storms would require several billion dollars in construction work alone. And that's on top of everything already planned. That raises the real question at the heart of the entire $60 billion plan. Is Miami buying itself another half-century of viability? Time for technology to improve, for economies to adapt, for orderly transitions to safer ground? Or is it staging the most expensive slow-motion exit strategy in history, propping up property values just long enough for current owners to cash out before the music stops? Let's return to Isola di Lolando one more time. If the 1920s developers had completed their full vision, islands stretching up the bay, a fragmented coastline of artificial land, Miami today might look like Dubai's Palm Islands. And Dubai's Palm Islands, by the way, are sinking. A completed 1920s plan would have meant even greater exposure, more ecological damage, and an even more expensive bill coming due right now. But if Miami ultimately chooses retreat instead of defense, tens of billions in existing infrastructure, tunnels, ports, transit lines, the mega developments still being built, could become stranded assets decades before their intended lifespans. The Miami World Center alone is a $6 billion mixed-use development still under construction, betting that the city has a future worth building for. The 1920s developers learned you can't fight nature forever. A single hurricane ended their dreams overnight. The question is whether modern Miami will learn the same lesson or prove them wrong. Miami has spent a century manufacturing land, and now it's spending $60 billion to keep that land above water. The city is caught between hard infrastructure that can't stop water seeping through limestone, soft infrastructure that takes decades to mature, and social pressures that may determine who gets protected and who gets displaced. The dredge and fill decisions made 100 years ago locked Miami into its current footprint. The decisions made in the next 10 years will determine whether that footprint survives the century or becomes the biggest ghost island of them all. Out in Biscayne Bay, those concrete pilings still stand, the bones of a dream that collapsed before it was finished. They're a monument to what happens when ambition outruns reality. And right now, Miami is making the same bet all over again, just at a scale that makes the 1920s look quaint.